Okay, now time to bring in our panel. Joining us from Beijing is Zou Yue. He needs no introduction. He's the news anchor, of course, for China 24 on CGTN. Also with us from Beijing is Fred Teng. He is president of the America-China Public Affairs Institute. And with me here in the studio is Sourabh Gupta. He is a senior fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. And joining us too from Irvine, California is McClory. He is managing director and head of China at Boustead Securities. Thanks so much, all of you, for joining us. Zou Yue, I have to start with you. I was in China for the 19th Party Congress, and it seems like yesterday, and now we're, of course, having the two sessions. What's the significance of these two sessions, considering it follows that 19th Party Congress, and also considering the anniversary, obviously, of 40 years of China opening up, and, of course, all these new ideas about moving the country forward?
Yes, indeed, Nathan. You were covering the 19th CPC Congress, and 5 months later, it is the annual two sessions. Actually, this is a time for the party to collect ideas about the philosophies and policies they formulated at the 19th CPC Congress. The most important thing this time at the NPC is probably a nomenclature problem. That is how to put the Xi Jinping thoughts, to be exact, the Xi Jinping thoughts of socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era into China's constitution. And we Chinese regard this a very important thing, a 名正言顺. When you can put a name, a proper name to an idea, then it can stand for reasoning.
Interesting. Fred Teng, I want to get back to the 19th Party Congress and a continuity here, because Xi Jinping in his 3-hour speech really set the course for how China is going to develop over the next few years, but also decades up to 2049. Let's just play his sort of strategic vision and see how that fits in with the two sessions coming up. Let's just hear that, and I'll ask you a question off the bat.
This is our strategic vision for developing socialism with Chinese characteristics in a new era. Finish building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. Proceed to achieve modernization, and then move to turn China into a great modern socialist country in every dimension.
I mean, that was widely seen as a very ambitious, forward-thinking speech, Fred Teng. I suppose this is where the rubber hits the road in terms of how these policies get instituted. So what should we look for?
Well, I think certainly, we can look for, they will also, on the domestic policy side, to improve the people's livelihood, to eradicate poverty, and again, to continue the anti-corruption.
Thank you. Going to Irvine, California, and McClory, what are you looking for out of these two sessions?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that what was discussed in October, the ideas and the thought, are now turning into action. And we can look no further than the recommendations that we understand for the 4 new vice premiers and the areas that they're going to focus on. We've heard of a couple: poverty alleviation, absolutely, environment, another top of the list priority, and then controlling financial risk. So we understand that debt and levels of debt are a key priority that need to get under control and need to have a plan. So you're going to see senior officials being named to those positions, and I think that underscores not only the importance of those sectors, but the fact that China is acting. And make no mistake, these are areas that any westernized country, any developed nation has prioritized for decades, and China, rightfully so, is prioritizing all 3 right now.
Dan, I'm going to just follow up with you because obviously you've got an eye on the economy. Liu He, the big economic advisor, is here in Washington, D.C. This week, very much pushing the fact that China may surprise on the upside, his message at the World Economic Forum when it comes to reform. But then, obviously, we're seeing different economic policies in Washington at the moment. How can China sell itself to the world in terms of its continued opening up over these two sessions?
Well, again, I think it needs to show it has an emphasis on the right priorities, and certainly debt is one of the areas where there's been international commentary, if not concern. So there's a talk of combining the insurance regulator with the banking regulator, for example, and having a super regulator in China to really take action there. I think the extension of the Xi presidency is going to allow a focus on continued reform of state-owned enterprises. So those will become and be emphasized as national champions. And I think in creating opportunities for foreign firms to come into China, you don't need to look any further than some of the indigenous industries where China really stands out. And my examples would be financial technology or fintech and artificial intelligence. So some of the greatest intellectual property is being created in China right now in both of those sectors. So companies from around the world are coming to China to find out about cashless payment systems, for example.
WeChat Pay, yeah.
This is where I think you'll see emphasis.
Yeah, interesting. Sir, I want to just ask this question. During the 19th Party Congress, Xi Jinping came up with this sort of contradiction idea that as people demand better lives and what have you, we have seen a difference between rich and poor. How much is poverty alleviation going to be the heart at these two sessions? Because there's some very ambitious targets with China becoming a moderately prosperous society in the next couple of years.
I think poverty alleviation will be one of the very important topics simply because it is a very close near-term goal. Many of the other goals can be marked out in a decade or more than a decade. But I think he has a particular goal by 2020 to try to remove abject poverty, and that's very important. And that's why even when Liu He spoke at Davos, he talked about 3 critical battles. Poverty alleviation was one of those 3 critical battles. So it is a very important near-term priority, and from that perspective, I think there will be great focus.
Zou Yue, the term limits questions raised a lot of headlines really quickly here in the West. There are so many questions going about, but can you sort of clear this up for us? So the presidency and the vice presidency, there'll be no more 2-limit terms. But Xi Jinping also holds other offices, like the General Secretary, obviously, of the party, the most important, head of the Military Commission, which don't have term limits. Is this the idea behind it, trying to create some sort of synchronization or enhance the presidency? What's the thinking behind that?
Yes, you are correct. According to China Daily, this is to bring compatibility and coherence within the constitutional system, because it has been established that the head of the party, the ruling party, and the military, and the head of state falls on a single person. If there is no term limits for the General Secretary of the CPC and the chairman of the Central Military Commission, there shouldn't be a term limit for the head of state. That's the President of the People's Republic of China. But the China Daily also says that doesn't necessarily mean the abolition of the retirement of party officials of the Chinese Communist Party or lifetime services for any public official at all.
Fred Teng, is that your take? What do you have to add?
Well, I've been looking at this. Actually, you know, in the United States, the president has a term limit, but the governors, the senators, the congressmen, they don't have term limits, and doesn't make them less of a leader than the president. Right. In fact, in the United States, President Roosevelt served 4 terms because of necessity. And when you look at allied countries of the United States, like Canada, Australia, Japan, India, Germany, France, even the European Union, they all have terms, but there's no limit to how many terms that they can serve. So I think that this is, you know, President Xi, we're just looking at, well, he still has 5 years to serve, and afterwards, his colleague will decide whether they want to give him another term or not. But by taking away the term limit, it does not make him a lame duck of a leader, so that he can fully exercise his authority to push things ahead.
So just a quick follow-up then, with this ambitious agenda set up at the 19th Party Congress, is this giving more stability to the fact that these reforms need to be enacted and not have a lame duck situation like we've seen before?
Yes, I mean, it's always when you change leaders, that's when you have instability. But when you lead a state, people know what they're thinking, what they will do, and what they will deliver. So that actually creates the stability.
So, yeah?
I think this is a decision after a trade-off between system stability and flexibility. Mr. Xi and his team consider this is a huge challenge to move ahead the reforms he has charted at the 19th CPC Congress. He needed more time to deliver on those plans, And he wants a new pact with the people. This is a bigger game than we thought. I need more time to make good on the plans. And please, let me do that, and I can deliver a win for all these things.
Let's go to Dan. In terms of the reforms that are being suggested, which ones do you think are the most likely to be enacted first? Are we going to see the poverty alleviation targets hit, or are you looking to see continued reform and opening up?
Well, certainly poverty alleviation is key, and the statistics we have so far show that almost 60 million people have been lifted out of poverty just in the last 7 years. The goal is to lift another 20 million people. And remember, the definition of poverty in China is about $380 a year in income. So there's a massive group that's already being affected. I think we're going to continue to see the support of national champion industries and companies, and not just from the state-owned sector. You know, look at the Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. These are companies that, among them, have $1 trillion in market cap and have dominant positions. And so now they are cross-investing in other traditional industries and companies within China. And all that wealth, all that equity has been created literally from innovation, and it did not come from the state sector itself. So I think you're going to see continued support of those types of companies, and I think there will be opening up opportunities in those sectors as well. Clearly, your comments earlier about President Trump and his pronouncements about tariffs and then some discussion of a trade war, or at least a trade skirmish, is going to provide a little bit of noise or a grease fire off to the side while this is going on. But I think the two countries are going to work things out, and no one is going to put overly punitive tariffs on the other. The relationship, the interdependency between the U.S. and China is just too great.
Well, I want to pick up on tariffs after the break, but let's finish this point about poverty. I want to just play Xi Jinping and Sourabh. I'll get your take off the bat.
After 3 years, we will win the final phase of the war on poverty. This will be the first time in thousands of years of Chinese history that extreme poverty has been eliminated.
That was President Xi in his New Year's address. So we're on the road to, as you said, moderately prosperous society. Then there's this interim period of proceeding to achieve modernization. What does that mean exactly?
What he means at that point is that by 2035, China will become a wealthy and a prosperous country, but still will not be at the peak of its power and its modernization and its capabilities.
So coming out of developing country into developed, but not quite at the top of that chain. Exactly.
I think perhaps an analogy would be best. He's looking at something like what South Korea is today. South Korea is. It's an advanced society, but South Korea still is not where Japan is in some respects. When you look at it from a per capita income perspective, when you look at it from an economic productivity perspective, so it's an interim phase where you are an advanced country, a developed country, but there's still that much more space to go.
Okay, this is fascinating, but we do need to take a break. We will continue our discussion on China's 2 sessions when we come back. Please stay with us. You're watching The Heat.